Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what is arguably the ultimate biological origin story, human reproduction. We're looking at a highly complex, beautifully synchronized process here, right? We're going to break down both the male and female anatomical systems to see exactly how these two distinct halves collaborate to create human life.
So let's start by defining the absolute core mechanism that makes human life possible, which is internal fertilization. Instead of leaving things vulnerable to the outside elements, this entire process happens safely inside the female's body. During sexual intercourse, semen containing literally millions of sperm is deposited, and boom, that sets off this intense, microscopic race to seek out and fertilize an egg.
To make this complex biological machinery easy to digest, we're going to take a quick anatomical tour through 4 key stages. We've got 1. The goal of reproduction, 2. The male reproductive system, 3. The female reproductive system, and 4. The journey to fertilization. Let's get into it.
Starting things off with Section 1, the goal of reproduction, producing cells and nurturing life. Before we look at the parts, we really need to look at the big picture and understand the primary biological challenge we're dealing with here. When you compare them, it brilliantly illustrates the completely complementary roles of both systems. Think of the male system as being fundamentally designed for production and delivery. Its main job is just to produce and deposit sperm. The female system, on the other hand, well, it takes on a much more multi-layered biological function. Yes, it produces the egg cells, but it's also fully equipped to receive, protect, and actually nourish a developing fetus all the way until birth, the whole shebang.
Okay, moving on to our first structural tour, here is Section 2, the male reproductive system, focusing on production and delivery. As you probably know, these sex organs are primarily located outside the abdominal cavity, right down around the pelvic region.
Let's take a look at the primary hardware. We have the penis, which features a long shaft and an enlarged tip called the glans penis, made up of soft, spongy tissues. Then, hanging outside the abdomen within the scrotum, you've got the testicles. Resting right against them is this whitish mass of tightly coiled tubes called the epididymis. And connecting it all together is the vas deferens, which is a tube leading straight to the urethra. When you put all these together, they essentially form a highly specialized manufacturing and storage facility.
Now, there's a fascinating evolutionary quirk when it comes to the testicles. They don't actually start out on the outside of the body. They actually begin their development deep inside the abdominal cavity. It's only during the last 2 months of fetal development that they descend into the scrotal sac. But you gotta wonder, why go through that entire migration? Well, it turns out this descent is strictly a temperature control solution. Our standard internal body temperature is simply way too high for the successful production of viable sperm. So by hanging outside the abdominal cavity, the testicles are kept just cool enough to ensure that sperm can actually be produced and survive. It's literally built-in biological climate control.
All of this specific architecture creates a really clear sequential pathway. It's essentially a biological conveyor belt. Step 1 is production, happening inside those climate-controlled testicles. Step 2 is storage, where they're held and mature inside those tightly coiled tubes of the epididymis. And finally, Step 3 is transport. They travel right up the vas deferens tube to the urethra for eventual ejaculation.
All right, let's transition our focus over to Section 3, the female reproductive system, reception, production, and incubation. We're moving from a system focused on external delivery to a seriously incredibly dynamic internal environment.
Unlike the male system we just looked at, these structures act as a deeply interconnected internal pathway. You've got the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, which you probably know as the womb, the oviducts or fallopian tubes, and the ovaries. Every single one of these components has to work in absolute perfect synchronization to both create egg cells and, potentially host a growing fetus. Let's break down how these structures protect and prepare for potential life, moving from the outside in. The vagina receives semen at climax, and it's protected from external infection by pubic hair, which, as an aside, is a key sign of puberty. Moving upward, we hit a bit of a bottleneck, the cervix, which is this lower, narrow, cylindrical portion of the uterus. And above that sits the ultimate destination, the uterus itself. This is a pear-shaped, highly muscular organ whose primary job is to accept a fertilized ovum and actually develop exclusive blood vessels just to nourish it.
Then, further up the chain, we find the primary production centers, the ovaries. These are the internal organs where ova, or eggs, are produced and stored. Upon maturity, an egg is released in a really precise, periodic process called ovulation. And it's exactly this rhythm that serves as a biological metronome, completely dictating the length of the female menstrual cycle.
Finally, let's explore Section 4, the journey to fertilization, where the two systems meet. This is the big crossover event, the exact moment where the biological products of both these systems finally interact.
Just like we tracked the path of the sperm earlier, let's map out the ovum's critical journey here. It kicks off with release. A follicle literally ruptures and the ovum escapes the ovary. Next is capture, where it enters the fallopian tube. Then comes transport, where it's essentially crowd-surfed toward the uterus by the movement of cilia. Those are tiny hair-like structures lining the inside. And finally, implantation, where it settles into the endometrium, which is the uterine lining.
But this trip through the fallopian tube isn't just an instant drop. It takes hours or even days to complete. And this creates a highly specific, fleeting biological window. This is the exact time frame where fertilization actually has a chance to occur.
It's right here in the fallopian tubes where a massive divergence happens. In one scenario, the unfertilized ovum simply travels down the oviduct to the uterus without ever meeting a sperm, and the cycle just resets. But in the alternative scenario, if the egg meets an incoming sperm while still traveling through that tube, boom, fertilization happens right there, officially initiating a pregnancy.
If that successful fertilization occurs, the fertilized ovum becomes an embryo and firmly implants itself into the endometrium. At this point, the uterus basically transforms into the ultimate incubator. The embryo develops into a fetus and is safely gestated inside that muscular uterus, drawing nourishment from those custom-built blood vessels all the way until childbirth.
It really is an absolute marvel of biology. I mean, from microscopic cells navigating a massively complex anatomical pathway to the creation of a completely new human being. I hope this explainer helped map out this incredible synchronized process for you. It really leaves you to wonder, what other hidden miraculous biological systems are flawlessly operating inside your body right this very second?